Good evening. Welcome to Tripping on Legends. I am your host, Christopher Balzano. We're trying a few different things tonight, so if there is any problem with the audio, I've got to let you guys. You guys have to let me know what's going on here. I wanted to start off by saying that I have been asked to be part of the Midnight FM family. And so I will be recording this live, doing this Facebook Live and doing it the way that I've been doing it, but also at the same time, I'll be able to kind of reach out to other people. So it's really kind of interesting. I'm just connecting my things here and making sure that everything is all set because I'm not quite sure that they're getting me. So if you haven't listened to Midnight FM, they've got some really great shows. Obviously, the Midnight Society is the flagship of that station, hosted by the infamous and amazing Tim Weisberg. And he has asked Tripping on Legends to be part of that family. So it's kind of interesting. I was telling him, with everything that I've got going on and some of the changes that have gone on, et cetera, with the show, I was going to put the show down for a little bit. I was going to kind of concentrate on getting the writing done, of course, with the school year starting. And they asked me to be part of that team. So I was like, all right, well, I'll see what I can do, do the best of it. It's a really great way to get the legends out to people, as well as to get feedback and hopefully stories from other places, not just Florida. So we can kind of even give context to these Florida stories. When I go out and I look for the certain legends that are all around Florida and I'm documenting something, it kind of, tonight's legend is actually a really good example of that. It obviously touches base with other legends throughout the country, right? So I was going through, I got this really interesting legend from a pond in the Ocala Forest, right? So I'm not going to give you all the details. That's not tonight's episode. But what I found was the backstory was kind of this mixture of Native American folklore and American folklore. And I was like, well, I've heard elements of that story from all across the country, from other legends in Massachusetts or ones that I read in books when I was younger. And so this is another way for me to kind of give context to that and hopefully get in touch with some people who their ghost stories and the ghost stories that they're experiencing are the same ones or, have that same kind of flair that that these Florida ones have, right? Because that's what it's all about. It's all about discovering what these legends are, what they mean for the community. So even if you have an interesting story like the one I'm going to tell you tonight, the impact of that legend on the community is so much different than the impact on the community somewhere else. Like this simple little haunting and this local hero, this local icon, is a huge figure to the people of Ocala, but might not be for other places. You know what I'm saying? Like it's kind of one of those situations where some elements of this are going to seem very familiar to people. Some are going to be like, oh wow, like yeah, I've got someplace just like that. But it's the magnitude that Morris has taken in the community of Ocala, and even the nostalgia for Morris's place that is kind of the difference maker. Before I get too deep into things, I want to remind people that if you have an interesting story, it can be about a theater legend like we're going to talk about tonight, or it could be anything that you feel like talking about tonight, a legend in your story, in your area, in your town, your community that you want to share. I would love to have you share it online, share it on the air with us. So we're going to try to go through the legend, but I'm always anxious to be interrupted by people. You know me, I love a good tangent. And that's kind of what this show is all about. So if you have something that this sparks you to think about a legend that you know, or you just want to share one with you, please feel free to call. The number is 813-418-6822. It's in the chat. And if you are listening to this on podcast and you don't have the ability to be in the Facebook live chat, you can always become part of the Facebook family at www.facebook.com/trippingonlegends. And of course, this is also posted simultaneously, although the poor connection is has not been well to me tonight, on my Instagram. The Instagram is @spookytripping. And of course, you can follow me at Twitter on @spookybalzano. And of course, the newly designed and kind of vamped up website is trippingonlegends.com. So a lot of ways to get in contact with me if you want, if you've got a story to share. I do not have Robert tonight. I mean, I've got Robert back there. But tonight I am sporting the Gemini mug. So we're going to see if there's possibly a Gemini sponsor out there. People say that Gemini is the worst sign because we are dual personalities. And this episode might actually feel a little bit like there's dual things going on with it, because there's kind of a weird vibe in the air tonight, especially with the Instagram feed. But we're going to try the best we can. And if not, you can always pick it up at podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. So I was, this weekend, we had, my kids and I, we had a whole E.T. Themed night planned, right? So we made these great, these great food ideas that had everything to do with E.T. And then we watched the movie, right? Then we sat down and we actually able to watch this classic movie, right? And the kids had seen it before too. And it wasn't anything new to them. There was nothing that they were necessarily, because they're not artists or overthinkers when it comes to movies, there was nothing new they were going to catch. It's just a really good movie that is a really good family movie to sit down, take in, talk about it. You know, a movie like that is good because you can talk about the movie or talk to the movie as it goes, right? Like, you don't have to be completely aware of what's going on. You don't have to be polite because you've seen it before. So you can throw in this commentary. Nothing is better for my kids than commenting on everything they see. That's the culture that they have now, right? They watch YouTube videos that involve them, or other people commenting on everything. So we're sitting down, we're watching it, and everything about the movie at the beginning of this is dripping with nostalgia. It's a great movie on its own merit. But there is something when you're watching a movie like that you remember the times that you saw it, right? You remember the theater that you saw it in. You remember the hysteria, right? It was totally a moment of #follow the signs, because not only had they come out with a honest trailer last week of E.T., but I also, in my inability to sleep, was trying to watch documentaries that would make me fall asleep. So ones that weren't like overly stimulating. And I watched the documentary about the fall of Atari and the whole idea of the video game of E.T. being so bad that it buried, as they were burying the tapes of it, it buried the entire company of Atari. And when I was watching the movie, when I was watching the documentary too, all of those feelings came flooding back, right? The idea of everything I got that Christmas was for E.T., right? I got an E.T. hat. I remember I got an E.T. lunchbox, and the lunchbox lasted about 2 days before it got smashed in. I got the E.T. video game. For those of you guys who don't know that story, it was a really, really bad video game, and it was really bad for us as we were playing it, and we hated it. And my dad almost got arrested returning it because they wouldn't accept it back. It's like, no, this game has been opened. And it got pretty nasty. It got pretty, and we almost ended up getting, my dad almost got taken in. And so I'm watching E.T., and I'm remembering being in the theater, and I'm remembering that story about Christmas, and I'm remembering all of these things that have to do with the nostalgia of E.T. And so it's a great movie on its own merits, right? It's this great movie that you're watching and you're enjoying it, and you're enjoying, if you're a fan, a huge fan like me, you're enjoying the way that Spielberg works, right, and the way that he designs a scene and shoots a scene, and all those kinds of things. But there's also this nostalgia. There's also this, especially that movie, right? Because Spielberg is a master of making something timeless, but capturing a moment in time as well. And it is so early 80s that you are drawn into those little quirks that make it. The Star Wars action figures, the way the houses looked, that love of bikes and the huge headphones, like all this stuff, looking at Ponyboy, and even this nostalgia for C. Thomas Howell and all that kind of stuff. And you're watching it, and there's this mixture of this is a snapshot, or this is a time of my childhood, but it's also, art itself. And the interesting thing is that ghost stories are, thank you, Trudy. Ghost stories are almost like captured nostalgia. They often are, there's that great meme that's out there that says, why is there no ghost of a few years ago saying, I'm Britney, bitch. But it's this idea that they're almost a storybook, and they're a storybook of a time gone by. And the closer we are connected to that time gone by, the more powerful the story is itself, right? It is history. I think I've heard Jeff Belanger say it's history dying to be remembered. And when we get that feeling, when we get that overwhelming emotion of this is something that needs to be remembered, or this is something important, or this is something that was important to me, the stronger the ghost story is, but also the stronger the desire to have a ghost story attached to it. If it is just a house that no one is connected to whatsoever, there's not going to become a ghost story to it, right? It might be spooky, but there's not going to be this feeling of attachment to it. Whereas if it's some place where everyone went, if there's some place that everyone has a story about it before it closed down, or everyone has a feeling for the place because they've been there, they've lived it, they've breathed it, then the richer the ghost story tends to be, and the more long-lasting, right? And so these things that could potentially be pushed off as being nothing are given much more weight because you were there, right? It was part of your history, it was part of your past, and reliving the ghost story is also reliving those moments as well. And a perfect example of this is the Ocala Civic Theatre. So it's interesting because when I started researching this, it was just like a footnote in something else. And I started digging, and what I realized was that this theater was really important to the community of Ocala for a lot of years. And the new theater, spoilers, the building gets torn down. The new theater is like 25 years old, almost 30 years old, and they still call it the new theater because so many of the locals and so many of the quote-unquote old-timers are attached to the power and the memory of that old theater, right? And so it's interesting that this trail really began because two men, their names are Rick Allen and Dave Schlenker, who I'm totally massacring his last name, wrote different articles celebrating the Ocala Civic Theatre as it was kind of on the tail end, as they were essentially tearing it down. And both of their articles, and Rick really had the two articles that specifically talk about the theater and its history, two amazing articles. The push was remembering the theater. And in remembering the theater, it was almost impossible for a lot of people to separate their memories of the theater from the memories of the ghost that is said to have haunted it. And the two things were almost said in conjunction with each other. They were said kind of, oh, here's my memory of the theater, and it was for all intents and purposes a really difficult place to see a show, and yet there was, because of that, and oftentimes exactly because of that, there was a connection to the community. There was that like, oh yeah, you had to, you could hear the bathroom. That's one of the things you could hear the bathroom while people were acting. That connects you, right? And then almost immediately, boom, they talk about the ghost. And the ghost that almost pretty much everyone agrees was haunting the theater is a guy by the name of Morris Osborn. And Morris Osborn is, if Morris Osborn had never been a ghost, he would still be this amazing character. He would still be this kind of mythical figure in the history of Ocala. So he was born in 1899 in Alcoa County, and he kind of went off to make his fortune, right? He went off to discover what he would be. And over the course of the time that he was out there in the world, he was pretty much everything. He was known to be like a prankster. He was known to be a showman, right? And that's a really important part of his personality, is this idea that he was the showman. The show was it for him. That was the driving force of everything he did. So as he kind of went off to go make his fortune, he had all these different jobs. He was a dry cleaner. He worked at a restaurant. He worked at a dance club. And then he met the person who would change his life, who was Catherine. She was 20 years younger than he was, and she was. It's hard to say, and it's maybe not entirely appropriate to say she was the brains of the operation. He was the kind of flash, right? But she was she was the one with the ideas. She was the one with the follow through, and for all intents and purposes, they loved each other. A lot of the information that came out about Morris after his death, when they were doing this retrospection, this retro kind of thing on him, was based on an autobiography that Kat wrote about him. She, for all that you could say, like, she loved this man and she wanted him to succeed. She kind of saw the greatness in him and wanted the rest of the world to see it as well. And so they decided to move back to Florida. And one of the main things that they did when they came back was they started to work at Silver Springs. So if you followed kind of some of the Silver Springs things we did, they started after the main attraction, after the bottomless, the window bottom, the glass bottom boats became so popular, they wanted to add to that. And so they ended up doing this whole animal farm, right? This whole like zoo, and they had all these exotic animals, and people say that that's a big reason why the why the monkeys escaped, was because they were part of that initial. Although that's kind of like a legend unto itself. But this is, he went to work for Alan Ross, and so he was part of that animal trainers aspect of Silver Springs. He was part of the trainer one, and he had this showmanship about him. Now, Morris, for years, had been training as a magician, and he wanted to perfect all of these tricks. And actually, even after his death, spoiler, he dies, he created this device that's called the third hand, which is like, still, I don't know what the third hand actually is, but it's this device that revolutionized, or at least like brought something new to the table, that people are still using this trick, this kind of mechanism that he invented for his show. And he had early on met a magician who told him that the secret to really having a lasting and amazing show was to build your own theater. And that's what Morris set out to do. And he opened it up in 1953, and it was built. This is going to kind of become important as other things happen. It was built to be a theater specifically for his show. So as he was designing his show, he was building this structure that would accommodate that. So for example, like, and this is something that a lot of the people talked about, it had a trap door. So like the stage had an invisible trap door, and it was designed not to be anything more than going in and seeing him, right? And it was his dream, and he did it, and he opened it up. And it's considered the first magic theater in the United States. Now, I haven't been able to confirm that, but that's what they say. I got it from two different sources that it was the first, theater built specifically for a magician. And his show was called The Girl from Nowhere, and it cost an entire $1.25 to get into this magnificent show. And so he did his first show, and it brought the house down. It was an overwhelming success. People absolutely loved it. And then he had his second show, and it was kind of a disaster. For some reason, it didn't go anywhere near as well. It didn't sell as well, and the show itself didn't go off as well as his first show. And he decided that he was going to kind of shut it down for a little bit to figure out what was going on. And he was looking to revamp the show, and he ended up in the hospital. And there's a psychic whose name was Ethel Boyce, and Ethel Boyce said that, this was going to be kind of the end of him. He ends up dying before the third show ever goes off. And he was only 54 years old. He died September 24th. And this idea of him dying of a broken heart. Now, that might be hyperbole, right? Like, that might be one of those things where you say, oh, well, really? I mean, was it a broken heart, or is it just afterwards? You're putting a little... From what accounts were later on, it was of a broken heart. Like, it was devastating for him that he had spent all this time building up this empire, right? Building up this building that would be a testament to him and he could do his own shows to. And then to essentially, for him to fail on the second show, the way that it's always phrased is that he died of a broken heart. He did die of a heart attack, so it's not too far off and it's not absolutely ridiculous. But, it's this idea that is perfect fertile ground for a ghost story, right? We have the whole concept, that whole idea of unfinished business and not being able to go on with things because you've got something that you have left to do. Or you died in some kind of state that does not allow your spirit to be at rest. And what more, I have an entire book, Haunted Love, right? What more motivating force than to die of a broken heart, right? To get so close to your dreams and then to, in your opinion, fail. Now, here's the interesting thing about it. They never say whether or not this whole concept of he died of a broken heart came afterwards, right? Or whether it was something that kind of people were saying from the very beginning, right? So it's easy once this next part happens to say, oh, well, he died of a broken heart and that's why the ghost is there. Or whether from the very beginning people were saying, oh, Morris he died of a broken heart. Either way, it's one of those things where people have been talking about that aspect of it for years because, this building was almost immediately turned around. So once he had died, they had to sell the building, right? They had to get rid of it. and it was sold to the Marion Players, they called themselves, after Marion County. So the Marion Players, who would eventually turn the name of the theater into the Ocala Civic Center. And almost immediately, it was 3 weeks later that they sold it after he died, almost immediately people started to experience weird things in the building itself. Now, remember I said that the structure was not the most secure building, right? It wasn't built with the best of materials, nor was it designed in such a way to accommodate like a full show, right? And so one of the things that people always talked about, like I said, was the fact that the bathrooms were like right off the stage, and so you could actually, while you were in the theater, hear people going to the bathroom. There are stories. This is creepy as all heck, as all hell. I don't swear anymore, I guess, on the show. This is creepy as all hell. That there are people who would report that they would be in the dressing room getting ready, and the curtains behind them would be moving because of the rats. But it was more than that, because there was almost an idea in that of like, this is our crappy little theater, but we love to go there, right? That stuff could easily be explained away. What couldn't be explained away was the fact that Morris was making things move. If any of you have ever experienced, I went to Emerson, right? We had the Majestic. The Majestic is one of the most haunted buildings in Boston. And these are very, very similar reports. So people would actually have things go missing all the time. And then they would show up in someplace else. They would see a shadowy figure in the theater itself. And everyone who reports this, everyone said it was weird that these things would happen, but they were never scared by them. Lights would go on and off without being, without explanation. There was actually a time when there was in the middle of the show, and they missed their cue, like they couldn't get the lights up, and then all of a sudden the lights went on, and the lights went on to the exact cue, like they couldn't get it queued up, and then all of a sudden the lights went on at the exact time. This happened several different times, and they always thought it was Morris. It was only, he would never mess with the actual plays. He would only mess with things like in the during rehearsals or during just kind of downtime. But he actually ended up being kind of a useful person. There are also several different stories I was able to find of people who were missing their props. They had personally misplaced it, or Morris had taken it, only for it to show up right at the exact moment that it was going to in some place that it wasn't supposed to be. And the interesting thing is, like I said, this is not one or two isolated incidents. This is story after story after story, time after time, incident after incident. It was almost as if anybody who was working there had some kind of story to tell. And anyone who had spent any time there going to plays actually had stories as well. And it was a successful theater. It was a pretty, it went on for 30 years, basically being this center of the community, and people loved it. Even though it was this crappy, dumpy little place, they really got into going to see a play there. And then when it was time to tear it down, people remembered those stories, and they remembered them fondly. I talked to Dave, and he was like, or Alan, and he was Alan, and he was able to give these stories. He was able to get these stories from people. People just had them, and they offered them up freely. And so everyone had kind of something to tell about this at an incident with Morris. And no one was ever able to actually see physically him, right? So no one ever actually saw someone who they could say, oh, wait a minute, that's Morris. But everyone knew that it was Morris, and they talked to him. They talked to him freely. And when they were missing things, they would actually ask him to give them back or to help them find it. And it would always happen. right? It was almost like he was their little go for the theater. In the 80s, it was moved. The theater itself was moved. So we're talking actually probably like more like 40 years since the new theater's been up. It was moved down the street to this facility, which I don't want to say that it's sterile. Like, it looks absolutely beautiful. It actually reminded me a lot of the outside of the Barbara B. Mann. But it doesn't have that same small town theater feel that I'm sure the other building had. So we have this moving of it, and it ended up becoming. It was painted red and blue with red and blue elephants, and it became the Republican headquarters. And so it was kind of the county's command center for the Republican Party in that community for another 20 years or whatever. And so it totally shifted. It's funny because both Dave and Rick that I talked to said that they tried to see if there was anything that had happened for when it was the Republican Center, and no one wanted to share that information. Like, no one who worked there would say anything or said that anything weird was going on or anything like that. So the ghost stories end there. So it's important, I guess, before we continue, to look at this idea of a haunted theater, right? Like, we want our theaters to be haunted. We want there to be ghosts. We want there to be this kind of mystique behind them. Theater people are dramatic people. There is a lot of juice going on there, right? So if we look at it from a paranormal side, we expect theaters to be haunted because people are essentially tapping into the past when they do a play, right? Most plays are about things that happened years ago, right? Because the play itself was written years ago. Most people are putting masks on there. There's the energy that it takes to transform yourself into a character, depending on what kind of acting you do. All that is prime real estate for ghosts, right? So there's a very legitimate reason for why a theater could be haunted, right? The idea that all these people then come into the theater and they give their energy, and the actors are giving it to them, and there's this feeding of it. That's how ghosts are born, right? But then there's also this idea that actors themselves, it's kind of a lot like a school in terms of you're sharing an experience that only you will share with those people at that time. And if you're connecting to the bigger thing that's there, you often do it through a shared history or a history of the place where you are that you pass down, right? So new actors pass it down to old actors, pass down to new actors, seniors pass it down to freshmen, teachers get involved. And there's this ebb and this flow and this kind of timeline of it. Actors are very dramatic people. They embrace the idea that there are these curses, right? I would love it if Ella could come here for this part, so she could tell me, because she actually knows like 3 or 4 other urban legends that take place. But I'm thinking specifically of the I'm not gonna say it, the Shakespearean prince or Shakespearean king curse that is kind of well known in theaters, and the idea of whistling in a theater and how that could bring bad luck to what's going on. So there's all these different kind of ideas that are out there of like the cursed theater. So you take this idea and those ideas of a theater being haunted and the desire for a theater to be haunted, and you mix it with the energy and the juice that's a potential for ghosts, right? And then you throw in this polarizing character like of Morris, and what you have is the perfect mixture, the perfect storm for a ghost and a ghost story, right? Because if it was just those, and the Majestic is a really good example of this. If you just have weird things that happen, if you just have those lighting cues that seem to go off, if you just have this idea of a things missing, or seeing a figure, or hearing banging in the balcony, or seats going down. If you just have that, the stories are kind of going to be fun. But if you have a person who's attached to it, and a person who's well known in the community, I mean, we're talking 1953. We're talking what, 70 years ago, and people are still remembering this guy. So he was this big, larger than life person because of that showman aspect of him. That being able to connect the story to him makes it even stronger. Now, the unfortunate thing is, the Republicans decided to go away. They went to, I'm not even sure if they went to a different building, or if they went to, they just decided to not disband, but to not have a centralized location. They ended up selling the building. It was torn down, and it became essentially a parking, or extended parking, for a Sonny's. So the good news is, when I did my first legend trip on this, I got to have Sonny's for the first time. Not a fan. And it's hilarious because, as I'm doing this, and as I'm eating this Sonny's, which wasn't bad, right? It's not that it was bad, but it's like, when we first started tripping on legends, part of what we were doing was actually going out and eating local food, right? And we had even joked, Natalie and I, about doing a separate show on the food, right? Or at least a blog on the food. So we went to we went to Bradenton, and we did the Manatee River, and we went to what was it called, Edelweiss, right? Or we went to we went to North Carolina. We went to specific, like, homegrown, like, mom and pop barbecue places. And I'm eating the Sonny's thinking, like, this is not this is not what we had in mind. But it was pretty good. But it was funny because I asked all the people who were there if they remember the theater. And all of the waitresses were older. I'm not going to say they were old, but they were definitely people, and all of them said they had lived in town their whole life. None of them remembered the Ocala Civic Theatre. None of them remembered it. It wasn't until I said, because I wanted to find out where the place was. It wasn't until I said, oh, the old Republican, headquarters. They were like, oh, yeah, that was right over there. And they were able to show me. I mean, it really is, I posted the pictures. It really is just a parking lot. Like, there's nothing special about it. There's nothing that you could tell. For all intents and purposes, the ghost of Morris has moved on. There are no reports of weird things happening at the Sonny's. There's no reports of weird things happening in the parking lot. More importantly, and this is kind of, I guess, the shame of it, there are no reports of hauntings at the new theater. And the new theater is not far away. It's only a few miles away. It only took me a few minutes to get there. And I wasn't able to get inside. The theater itself was closed because of, everything that's going on. And, but no one talks about Morris in that theater. No one talks about ghosts there at all. And it's sad in a way, right? Like, this is a bit of the town history. Like, not only is Morris part of the town history, but Morris's ghost is part of the town history. And it's part of the nostalgia of the theater itself, and the nostalgia of the history of a place that is, it's fair to say, losing its past. There's still a part of Ocala that, and Silver Springs, I connect those two, for this story especially, that is looking at the past, right? But it is chain store after chain store after chain store. You know what I'm saying? It is McDonald's, and, I can't talk bad about it because I went to the Tire King when I was there, because to fix my tire, and it would have been a lot harder if there was only a mom and pop tire place. But it is this oasis of modern. There is nothing that is. There's very little that connects it to that past. And so to not only lose a great place like this Civic Center, which was this crappy little local place, but it was theirs, right? It belonged to them. But also the ghost itself, and to have that ghost story, even if the haunting didn't survive, right? Even if the ghost itself was no longer there, the few people I was able to contact who are connected to the theater didn't even really know the story of Morris. And it's funny because his stories really permeated a lot of the other parts of town. And so, for example, Dave's mother used to work the ticket booth, and Dave used to be there himself. Used to be a part of the theater himself, and she used to think that some of the things that happened in her house were because she brought Morris home every once in a while. This idea that it's the town ghost, it's something that's connected, is really a driving, powerful force, and to lose that is sad. So it's and the other interesting part of this is that Morris's family, until Rick Allen went out there and was doing research and was able to contact the grandkids, they didn't even really know about their grandfather. And they especially didn't know about the ghost. They didn't know that the ghost was this thing that was, kind of popular and infamous in the community. And so it's that little bit of history, losing it is sad. So this is a great story that's going to make it into Haunted Ocala Ghost Stories, right? Haunted Ocala, National Forest. Because it really gives you a good complexion or an idea of the complexion of that community. But there's also a little sadness in the telling of it. Like usually a ghost story is spooky or uplifting, but this has that little tinge of aw to it, and it's one of those things where I would love it for that ghost to be back. So I tried. Right? I tried to connect. Not only did I go and I did, I tried to do a little EVP session. I tried to do a little mini legend trip, but it was like 6 or 7 o'clock at night, and the parking lot to the Sunnies, oddly enough, in times of social distancing, was pretty full. And I was already starting to get some really sketchy looks for people. And so even though I identified where the theater had been, I was like, all right, well, what can I do here? So I did a card trick. I did like the one card trick that I know. And as I was doing the card trick, I tried to communicate, right? So I tried to get him to be like, oh, here, am I doing it right? All this kind of stuff. Nothing. I got nothing. But I feel like, because I have to go back to the area, that I need an audience, right? Because like a magician is nothing, because a magician already knows the secrets, right? So I feel like I need this. I need someone to come with me to do the trick with me. You know what I'm saying? So there's that like audience feel to it. So anyone wants to volunteer for that, feel free to chime in and contact me. But it's this, I think a really interesting story that probably will get buried. Right? Like those people who are part of that ghost story, especially because it's not there anymore, will pass, right? Their voices will be silenced. And unless people are going back and reading the articles that Dave and Rick wrote on them, and maybe even my book, people won't remember. And, it's interesting. There's... when you're talking about a ghostly legend, you can point to something. You could say, here's where that used to be, or on this structure. I'm coming across this a lot because, I've been dealing with a lot of haunted places or haunted legends that involve places that burnt down. And it's this idea of, there is where it stood is not the same as that tactile, visceral response you get when when you can touch it, right? When you can see it with your own eyes the way that it was, or at least the revamped part of it. It's part of the reason why they keep remodeling Amityville, is because they keep trying to kill that idea of what people think Amity is, so people will stop going and checking it out and stuff like that. Not supposed to mention the A word, but I totally did. I would love for you in the last 10 minutes, if you want, to call in with your haunted theater stories, or if you've got anything in Ocala or the surrounding area, or if you just want to share your story, your kind of weird, haunted folklore, part of history thing with me. The number again is 813-418-6822. Sometimes I feel that I get so involved in the story that people are just like sitting back and listening. And so I should every once in a while remind people that they can kind of call in and share theirs. And we had a while there, we had some really interesting people who were calling in. So, I want to go back there. I want to haunt that again, or trip that again. I think it would be very interesting to do it with an audience and see if we can get something, maybe even a playbill. I'm not sure if any of that, I'm sure they played like the classic, theater tropes that were very popular in the 60s and 70s. Maybe I'll go there and do a little Godspell, right? Kind of relive my past, my nostalgia. Go out there and actually, do my first play was Godspell. I could go out there and I could do my Your Good Man Charlie Brown, which in all of my years of acting was the only lead I ever got. I was only appropriate for the dunce, for the loser. Whatever. What are you going to do with that? So I've got a few minutes left, kind of before I'm going to go down, and I wanted to share with you guys a little bit of the difficulty of writing a really good ghost story. And if you want to share yours with me after the show, obviously you can get the podcast, you can listen to this anywhere you get podcasts, but you can also visit any of our social media. Twitter is Spooky Balzano. Instagram is spookytripping at gmail.com. You can go to the Facebook page, which is /tripping on legends. I also actually have / Florida Haunted Love Stories, if you want to share a haunted love story from Florida and to kind of promote the book. And as well as I now have facebook.com / Haunted Ocala State Forest, if you have one of those stories. But if you just want to share a story, the Facebook or the email is the best way. But I wanted to talk for a little bit, and maybe this is better for like a longer show, but I wanted to ask you guys, what you seek, what you look for in a ghost story. I've now written, this will be my 5th book of straight ghost stories, right? So I have like the 2 how-to manuals, but this is, technically my 6th book, which looks to take a ghost story or a ghostly legend and present it to an audience. And I'm interested in how you do that, right? How you as an audience receive a ghost story. What are the elements that make a ghost story? I remember we actually started an episode with Natalie, and I was doing this. I was like, what do you look for in a ghost story to her? And here's how I'll explain what I'm talking about. I have read easily hundreds, so not even like dozens, hundreds of ghost books from the plethora of Schiffer ones I used to get. I used to book for Spooky South Coast, and so they used to sell. They used to send me books, like Penguin would send me books, or History Press would send them, or and a lot of Schiffer. I used to get boxes of Schiffer, and I'm going to use them as an example, but I'm not downing any Schiffer writer because I've written 2 for them, and it all seems to take the same form, right? It all seems to be the same story over and over again, and the only thing that changes is the details. And the thing that I've been concerned with, the thing that I've been kind of wrestling with, is that good enough, right? Like, and I think I'm going to do this in a bigger form next week, but this idea of how do you like your ghost story? Like, do you guys like ghost books? Like, do you like when you open up a book the way that they're told to you? Like I said, I've read hundreds of them. And writing one is really difficult if you want to do something different, right? I think there's an expectation of reader, there's an expectation of writer, there's an expectation of storyteller and the person who's being told the story, right? Like, you have to hit certain notes and certain beats to set up, and this is a really good, because this is a magic show kind of terminology, to get the reveal, right? If you don't have the reveal, if you don't have the ba-ba, then there's no payoff, right? And we've I'm talking about haunted objects, but my other ones as well have been attacked for, like, oh, they're not scary enough, or, well, why didn't you do this, or why didn't you write it this way, or and it's the idea of how do you tell a good ghost story? Like, what's the setup? What's the delivery? What is the way that is best given to an audience? How do you want your food, right? It's kind of like when you go into a restaurant and you order chicken parm, it's got to have certain things to be chicken parm, right? And if it doesn't have that stuff, it might be taste amazing, but there's that expectation that's not. So I'm giving you guys some homework. And your homework is, I want you to connect with me on one of these many media platforms, social media platforms that I talked about. And I want you to tell me what your expectation of a ghost story is, right? Like, when you are looking to get one from someone, right? When you're looking to be told one, what do you need to make it successful? So you can contact me with Instagram at Spooky Balzano. I'm sorry, Spooky Tripping. Twitter is at Spooky Balzano. Email is at spookytripping@gmail.com. You can hit me up on Facebook /Tripping on Legends. And I want you to tell me, I want you to get in touch with me, I want you to share with me how you like your ghost story. Like, what a ghost story has to have to be complete, to give you everything that you need. And I'm going to leave it at that. We're going to have a little bit more of a discussion on this, but I want you guys to help feed that discussion by actually coming to the table with what you guys need from that. And I'll talk a little bit more next week about kind of what some of the trouble that I'm running into doing this. But for now, there is no trouble, because there's another week kind of in the books. There are more ghost stories to tell. Next week, I've got one that I feel like I've teased this so much, but it's just really great haunted school /cemetery. And those are 2 great things when you mix them all the time. As well as just continuous discussion of how to tell. I've got this Tim O'Brien thing in my head: how to tell a true war story, or how to tell a war story, how to tell a ghost story. So I'm going to do something parallel to that. So you guys are going to have to tune in next week when I will actually be on the air at midnight.fm. I don't think what we experimented with tonight went through. But next week we will be on that network as well. It'll be a really good opportunity to show them what my audience kind of brings to the table. So I'm Christopher Balzano. You've been listening to Tripping on Legends, and here's hoping that all your trips are legendary.